We have something that I'm going to refer to, and I have referred to in the outline, as moral currency. I'm going to define that because it is my made-up term to discuss a concept or a phenomenon that we are all familiar with. Moral currency is the idea or the notion that people generally, because we are created in the likeness and the image of God, and we have some basic sense of what is right and what is wrong and what is fair and what is just. No matter where we live on planet Earth or when we live there, God put inside of every human being a basic sense of what is right and what is wrong. And in every civilization, there's some version of thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. We get those from the 10 Commandments, but actually 1,000 years before that, the Egyptians had this system that they call Maat, M-A-A-T. And if you look at Maat, it's because it's a code written out. I'm trying to tell you that what's the common thread is that God has revealed the truth to everybody on planet Earth. Now, there have been people who've chosen to ignore it, but God has made it so that every people on planet Earth at any point in time understood what was basically required of him. You know why that is? As a lawyer, I appreciate that more than I ever appreciated it when I was a minister. There's a concept called due process. It means the government can't take any action, any punitive action against you if it hasn't previously made you aware that here's the standard. And if you deviate from that standard, there's going to be consequences. And within the concept of due process, that's called notice. And often when I'm lecturing about notice, the concept of notice, I talk about the fact that when you go to an intersection, if you're in Germany, if you're in Japan, if you're in Italy, if you're in China, if you go to an intersection and you see a red octagon sign at that intersection, whether you read Chinese or Mandarin or Italian or French, you know what to do because you've been put on notice. That's what the stop sign is there for. Similarly, when you come to an intersection and the light turns yellow, you're on notice that you need to slow down because what's coming next is the red light. This concept of notice and due process we deal with every day. We are not aware of that, but that starts with God. God will not judge the world unless he's first given them notice, told them what the standards are, and then he will hold them accountable. We see the 10 Commandments with the Hebrews. We see Ma'at, and whether we want to get into the implications of what all Ma'at is, but we see negative confessions in Ma'at. They say, I have not slept with my neighbor's wife. I have not taken my neighbor's food, or things like that. Instead of saying, thou shalt not, it's I have not. It's like when you die and you're trying to get into heaven or into the next life, you have to stand before a judge of some sort and confess these negative things. I have not stolen. I have not cheated. I have not done injustice. Where does all that come from? People put different packaging on it, but the knowledge and the awareness that you're not supposed to do those things comes from God. Revelation and vision comes from God. And it's not just in one narrow area, it's in all areas of life. God is communicating his vision. Then when we, as human beings, try to walk and to execute the basic requirements of human justice and righteousness, as we've been talking about just now, we do it with the authority and the mandate and the support of heaven. This is what I call moral currency. It means we have status, we have something behind us. When you get a dollar bill and it's a U.S. Treasury note, what that piece of paper represents is that the U.S. government's going to back that. It's currency. I can spend that. It has weight. It can purchase things. But in the spiritual realm, there's moral currency. It's when you set out to do what is divinely right, what is just and what is right and what is fair, when you are obstructed by someone who is trying to prevent justice or righteousness from happening, you can spend your moral currency. You can stand there and say, I'm right and you're wrong. I don't care how many people are in my group. I don't care how many people you have. I don't care how many weapons you have. I don't care how many laws you have on the books. If you are opposing me and trying to execute and trying to enforce and trying to ensure that these basic rules of human behavior, which have existed for time immemorial, which again, I'm referring to as moral currency, then we as a group can spend our moral currency. When Dr. King went to Birmingham and they were directing the water hoses to these senior citizens, they were sicking the dogs on them, and they were locking up fourth graders and putting them in the paddy wagon, putting them in the jail. In that moment, Black people in Birmingham were spending moral currency, and it was having a moral impact. The images went around the world. President Kennedy was supposed to have a summit with the premier, who was like the president of Russia, who would be the equivalent. He was the equivalent of who is now Putin. When those images went around the world, the Russians, in the same sense that I talked about earlier with the Chinese, when I was there in 2017, the Russians were playing those images on their state-run TV every day. And they were saying, and America says it's a democracy. This is what democracy looks like. So much so that Dr. King had been getting arrested, and they had a bail fund. Harry Belafonte and what's the guy's name? Dean Martin. They would have parties at their house, and they would raise money, and they had a bail fund. So they would protest, and then someone would be there once they got arrested to pay their bail, and they would get out. But one of the strategists said, don't do that. Don't do that. Do not do that. When they arrest you, stay in jail. Because every day that you're in jail, every day that the jail is filled with Black people is a day that America is on trial. A day that America's moral depravity, for lack of a better term, a day that America's hypocrisy is on trial as it relates to the issue of race, as it relates to we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, a right to what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Russians were saying, America is not living out this creed. Look at that. They're knocking senior citizens, women over with water hoses. They're grabbing them one on each hand. 4 officers are carrying away a woman, an older woman, a 70-year-old woman. She's got a dress, her legs are sprayed. This is outrageous. So much so that President Kennedy called the mayor of Birmingham. He said, look, man, you're killing me. Get those people out of that jail and keep them out of the jail. What was happening? What was happening, folks? They were prepared to make sacrifices. They were spending moral currency. Whenever you stand up for what is right, please understand this, that people aren't going to celebrate you. And the establishment is not going to appreciate you, because for time immemorial, people who have advantage want to maintain the advantage. That doesn't make people in this country inherently more wicked than other people that have ever existed. It just makes them inherently normal. And we're still dealing with that right now. But we've got to make up our minds to spend some moral currency. You got to be dead to yourself. That's the only way that the group prospers. If it's just about you, I don't know. We're not going to make it. We can't make it as individuals. We have to make it as a group. And that's the word of the Lord, I think, to us right now. You're on the right team when we are advocating for justice and inclusion, not for privilege above any other group, but just to have the same, right? We're on the right team. We're on God's team, because God is not on the Black team or the white team. God is on his team, and God is a God of justice. Justice is a moral imperative. It is a divine mandate. So when we begin to articulate and demand it, we are actually moving in the divine stream. And that often looks like inconveniencing yourself. But Jesus already told us that if you want to be my disciple, if you want to be a person of consequence, if you want to be a person of eternal impact, you must take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow in that order. But what is our vision for how we're going to get to the place that we need to get to? I want to talk about this concept also. As I've told you that there's moral currency, there's also counterfeit moral currency. That's when people want to act like they're doing the right thing. They want to appear to be moral, but in fact, they're just trying to gain political advantage. I got to tell you, folks, and some people may take issue with me, but I think for the last 40 years, church, particularly the evangelical church, has been spending counterfeit moral currency. You hear what I said? I'm going to say it again because I want it to be quoted. For the last 40 years in America, we have been spending counterfeit moral currency. What is that? What does that look like? Saying that we are about a certain lifestyle, demanding that everyone else live a certain way, and then behind the scenes, we're not even trying to live halfway in terms of the moral commitment. Jesus rebuked the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, the religious establishment of his day, for that very behavior, Pharisaic behavior, where you appear spiritual. You go to the marketplaces of life and you dress in these long, ornate robes and you pray these majestic prayers, but your heart, you draw nigh to me with your lips, with your mouth, but your heart is far, far from me. That's the kind of religion that we've seen in America, particularly among the evangelical church. And let me say this before you say, well, how can you criticize the evangelical church? I'm not throwing rocks at the house. I'm in the house. I consider myself to be, as in the old Church of God tradition, saved and sanctified and filled with the Holy Ghost, with a mighty burning fire. I am evangelical in the sense that I believe that it's in the mandate and the duty of Christians to share the good news of the gospel with everyone. But we have gone far away from that. We have not modeled anything. We've gone from trying to model to mandate. But see, God didn't call us to, Christ didn't call us to mandate anything. If you know church history, you know that the church was most powerful, most vibrant when it was being persecuted, when it was an illegal entity in the Roman Empire. We've got to call out. This is something that we can do as African Americans. I think that God has given us that calling. That's part of our mission, how we can both gain political and spiritual influence is by calling out counterfeit moral currency, which tells people how they should live, but we ourselves are not going to constrain ourselves by the same standards. That's hypocrisy. The church is got a problem with credibility because the church is living a schizophrenic, bipolar-like existence in America. We are hypocritical. We are focused on all the things that the world is focused on, but God is saying, people, us, this community, step up.